Hey everyone, Kevin here. In this video, I'm going to play you a clip of something that aired on mainstream TV just now to a very large audience. And I do not at all want to take sides, left, right, center. I don't care if you like Fox, if you like CNN, if you like the Wall Street Journal, if you like the New York Times, or maybe you hate them all. I really don't care what side you're on. What I want to do is play this clip and then put aside any kind of emotion, and then let's look at the actual bill, because I'm going to show you sections of this bill you may not have heard of before, and I want you to see the print for yourself so that way you could make your own conclusion. This video that I'm choosing to play is not because I support this organization or because I do not support this organization. It just happens to be a very convenient video that gives me the opportunity to not only show you the psychology that's being sort of thrown around with this bill, but it's also giving me the opportunity to go into some more niche and interesting parts of this bill that you may not have heard of before. Let's get started. Now, I'm expecting at least 50% of you already to be very heated by me bringing this up. Remember, let's put the emotions aside. We're going to look at the bill using this as a guide. It gets intense though, so buckle up. Also, I just really want to clarify, this is not to bag on Fox. Just so you know, what I do while I read bills like this when they come out is I flip between CNN, Fox News, CNBC, and other channels while also reading news online, whether it's the BBC, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal. I try to read everything on all sides of the aisle. So I'm not particularly trying to bag on one particular party or organization. I just want to be very clear with that. And I also want to be very clear that you should totally, if you like my videos, check out my wife's vlog. I'll link it down below.
Well, the first thing to know about this bill is that it's big, maybe the biggest piece of legislation ever proposed in U.S. history. The estimated price tag for everything in this bill is $3 trillion. That's close to 90% of the nation's entire annual tax revenue. And keep in mind, that comes close on the heels of the last coronavirus relief bill that cost about $2 trillion. And of course, our usual annual spending is still there. It hasn't disappeared. So altogether, that's an awful lot of expenses, and every single new dollar will have to be borrowed because there aren't any left. That means that when the smoke clears from all this spending, only China will be able to bail us out. They'll have to. They're the only ones who can afford it. China has the strongest balance sheet in the world. At that point, we will be their vassals.
Now, I'm going to pause here and just say that when the United States borrows money, we actually borrow over 70% of the money that we borrow from ourselves. The vast majority of it is held in pension funds or by the Federal Reserve or by companies that buy bonds and treasury bonds directly, like banks or larger companies, even like Apple, who store their cash in these things called cash equivalents, which can be treasury bonds. In fact, here is a graphic directly from the United States Treasury that shows over 70%, or approximately 70% of the United States is owned by Americans. Yes, China and Japan own a large part, but I do believe it's slightly misleading to say that China is going to lend us all of the additional money, when in fact it's going to be ourselves that's going to lend an additional 70% to ourselves, and then a portion of that other 30% might be China, it might be Japan, but it will also be other countries.
So is it worth it? What will we get in return for doing that? Well, we spent all day reading Pelosi's bill to find out. Too few did that. We did. And here's what we found. First and most glaringly, with more than 30 million Americans out of work, really the last thing we need is more illegal low-wage labor from abroad. Yet this bill goes out of its way to supply illegal immigrants, who, in case you needed to be reminded, have no right to be here in the first place, with billions in taxpayer dollars. According to House Democrats, illegal immigrants must have a right to have the $1,200 checks that American citizens received in the last bill. They would also receive the same direct payments as American citizens going forward. So in effect, it's a huge payoff, the Democratic Party's most cherished constituency, a group that's not even allowed to be here.
Now, this particular claim by Tucker Carlson leads you to believe that anybody who is in the country illegally will be eligible for the additional round of $1,200 of stimulus per individual. However, when we look at the actual text of the law, more detail is required. In fact, the text of the law specifically says that non-resident aliens are not eligible individuals for this $1,200 stimulus payment. Now, the definition of non-resident alien is twofolded. One, non-resident alien means you're not here legally. You don't have a green card, you are not a citizen, you're not here legally. However, the IRS does say that you can be considered a resident alien, which would mean you'd qualify for this $1,200, if you pass a substantial presence test. The substantial presence test says that if you've been here for at least 183 days within approximately the last 3 years and throughout the last 3 years, and it gets a little detailed here, so I'm skipping some of the detail, but once you pass a substantial presence test, and you have an ITIN number, which means you're actually paying income taxes, then you would be eligible for this $1,200. So yes, there will be a portion, at least based on this reading, of people who are here illegally who would potentially be eligible for that $1,200. However, those would likely be the individuals who are actually paying taxes on the income that they're receiving, which would narrow that pool of potentially illegal people here from getting that $1,200 stimulus check substantially.
And then it goes on from there. The bill contains an amnesty provision. For the duration of the coronavirus crisis, that's something I'd like to see extended a very long time, all illegal immigrants employed in so-called essential services would be shielded from deportation. And their employers would be shielded too. People who hire illegal aliens could not be prosecuted. Now, don't be fooled. This is not about protecting physicians who are critical to providing medical care to the rest of us. Current essential workers, as they are defined in this bill, is in fact an enormous category that spans almost every part of the American economy. It includes employees in food services, laundry, waste management, childcare, agriculture, transportation, restaurants, as well as any retail worker in America who works at a location that sells food or beverages. This is a blanket amnesty for virtually every illegal alien who has already taken an American job. And once this amnesty is granted, it will never be taken away. Bet on that no matter what they tell you. Anyone who lives in Washington can confirm that. Once passed, it's not going away. And at that point, there will be no more debate about illegal immigration. The issue will be settled permanently, and Democrats will win every presidential election for the rest of your life, the rest of your children's lives, the rest of your grandchildren's lives. That's the point of this.
Unfortunately, Tucker also substantially misleads his audience by suggesting that as soon as this bill passes, there will be permanent amnesty, and that essentially Democrats will win elections forever, which that part is really just a slippery slope argument, right? That's just suggesting that because this amnesty will be permanent, Democrats will win forever. But the problem is, I'm not going to argue the part about who's going to win in future elections. The fact is what we have to argue and look at. And we want to look at, would this temporary ban on deportations be permanent? Let's look at the actual text of the bill that he's referring to. On page 1737 of this bill, you will find temporary protections for essential critical infrastructure workers, which this already indicates temporary, which is different from what Tucker said. Now, what he did say is that critical infrastructure workers would be protected from deportation, and that is what it does say here. There would be deferred action, and there would be authorization for employment purposes in certain industries. So in other words, employers would be protected, and they would potentially be able to hire illegal immigrants. This is true. That is what this bill does provide for. However, Tucker indicated that this would be permanent. And what's very important is for us to scroll down to the section right here that says this provision ends 90 days after the date on which such a public health emergency terminates, which means the bill itself automatically has a termination for that in it. It's built in. And we already know that a lot of deportation has been temporarily frozen because there is a pandemic. Now, I'm not taking sides on whether or not deportation should actually occur. All I'm suggesting is that we look at the actual bill and see that what Tucker referred to is there. However, it does have an end already written into it. And he kind of leaves us with the thought that, okay, well, we'll have this amnesty period and then it's going to be impossible for us to undo it. But the undoing of it is already in the text.
The bill would automatically extend current guest worker visas while raising the ceiling for additional ones. Democrats have called this bill the HEROES Act. They're telling you it will help healthcare workers. But as of tonight, thousands of American healthcare workers are being furloughed from their jobs or fired entirely. This bill, remarkably, orders DHS to expedite visa processing for foreigners who want to come to the U.S. and work in healthcare. Got that? American healthcare workers laid off, now they could be replaced by foreigners willing to work for less. We don't have to guess if that could happen. It's happened throughout American industries. Under this bill, it would happen to our healthcare system as well.
Now, here I believe that Tucker is referring to articles like this in the Becker's Healthcare Review, which shows that University of Rochester Medical Care furloughs 3,400 workers, and we've seen articles like this frequently, mostly because hospitals are losing money dramatically because of the lack of elective surgeries, which are usually profitable for hospitals, which they can't do right now because of the pandemic and because they are inundated with pandemic-related costs. Unfortunately, Tucker doesn't mention some of the other things the bill does include to help hospitals with additional costs, and instead refers us to visa programs being extended so that more folks can be invited from out of the United States to the United States to take American jobs. So essentially what Tucker is suggesting is hospitals are laying off people, but Congress wants people to be hired from outside of the country. But what the bill actually does is provide more money for hospitals, and I'll show you those provisions in a moment. It allows hospitals to enter the PPP, which would enable them to rehire workers and have forgivable loan money if they rehire the workers they had laid off. And it does extend visa programs during the time of the pandemic. So that way it's kind of like if your driver's license expires while you're here, you don't have to renew it while you're here. Here's some of the parts of the actual bill. And personally, I just want to make this very clear. I'm not taking sides on whether I think visas should be extended or not. And I'm not taking sides on whether I think, hospitals deserve free loan money or whether this bill is good at all. I just want to point out the text because that is what Tucker is referring to. And the text on page 368 shows that $210 million will be given to Medicare and Medicaid service program management accounts, basically more money for these programs. On page 821, we'll see the small business provisions that actually now include hospitals for the Paycheck Protection Program. On page 73, we'll see an additional $150 million for program management for Medicare and Medicaid services. On page 83, we will see $4.575 billion for public health and social services emergency funds, and this is supposed to be designated for vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, necessary supplies, medical surge capacity, addressing blood chain or blood supply chain and workforce modernization, access to telehealth infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And even though this seems small, on page 226, there is the opportunity for first responders to deduct $500 in educational expenses that ordinarily would not be deductible from their taxes. This doesn't even mention that there are sections in here for increased pay and support for hazard pay. It doesn't mention the increased support for childcare for medical workers or first responders or essential workers, and countless other things within the bill. Again, I don't want to come across as a shill for this bill. I didn't even realize that would rhyme. I just want to show you that there are a lot of things that are being left out of what Tucker is saying, and I don't think it's a fair representation of the bill. Again, I'm not saying I'm for this bill. I just want to show that there is so much more detail that is being left out of Tucker's monologue.
Sorry, unemployed Americans, better get used to drawing a government check. That's your future. And then there's the long section in this legislation about drugs. The bill is strongly in favor of drugs, probably because when you're high, you're less likely to think or worry about what else is in the bill. The bill mentions cannabis 68 times. It orders the federal government to produce an annual report on, quote, expanding access to financial services for minority-owned and women-owned cannabis-related legitimate businesses. Democrats would like to see more drug sales in minority neighborhoods.
Let's pause there. He quoted a section from the bill and then said that Democrats want to see more drug sales in minority neighborhoods. Let's go to the actual text. On page 1077 of the bill, you will see that the bill calls for an inclusion report to gather information and data on the availability of access to financial services for minority-owned and women-owned cannabis-related legitimate businesses. Nothing in here actually says that they want more drugs in minority-owned neighborhoods. This is mixing together two things happening here. And in fact, the major part of this cannabis section is allowing people who collect money from legal cannabis sales in states where cannabis sales are legal to allow them to put money into banks. Because right now, in a state like California where cannabis is legal, those companies are not allowed to take that profit or the money they make and put it into the banks, which if they can't put it into banks, it also becomes very hard to tax and regulate. And the whole purpose that I believe the governments were suggesting maybe we should make cannabis legal is so that it could be taxed. But if people can't put the money or their profits into banks, then it's really hard to track, audit, and tax. Now, I'm not making a suggestion here that we should have more taxation or less taxation or that somehow cannabis should be legal or it should be illegal. I don't care. All I'm saying is there's, again, more to this, and it's being mixed together by Tucker's report or monologue here in a way that doesn't really give the text justice.
Keep in mind, these are the people calling you a racist. And the bill makes it clear they still believe you are. The bill mentions diversity at least 20 times. It would order all federal government agencies, to the greatest extent possible, to hold deposits in minority-owned banks. Okay, fine. But what does the pandemic and our response to it have to do with race politics?
Now, when Tucker's talking about minority-owned banks, I believe he's referring to this section, which I encourage you to read so you can make your own opinion, but it's on page 1092, Empowering Community Financial Institutions, and this would authorize a $2 billion appropriation for the provision of assistance for Bank Enterprise Award Program and for the financial assistance, technical assistance, training, and outreach programs designed to the benefit of Native American, Native Hawaiian, and Alaskan Native communities and provided primarily through qualified community development lender organizations with experience and enterprise in the community development banking and lending in Indian country. I think this is a specific part of the bill related to benefits for tribal organizations, so that is in here. I think that's being a little misquoted and not clearly presented. And it's under this section where you see that the definition of a minority is any Black American, Native American, Hispanic American, or Asian American. So I'm wondering if a little bit of what he's saying is kind of mixing the definition with this tribal grant program. Although, again, the bill is over 1,800 pages long, so it's quite possible on this one I might be missing the section he's referring to. I was having trouble finding it specifically. I believe it's this.
In the Democratic Party, everything has to do with race politics all the time. It's the primary way they get and keep power. Race politics is the only program they have, that and more crime and increased censorship. This bill, believe it or not, also contains a prison break provision. It's like a Saturday Night Live sketch. This bill would order the release of every federal prisoner who has asthma, diabetes, or is over 50 years of age, unless the Bureau of Prisons affirmatively proves the inmate in question is likely to commit violence against a specific person. Not in general, against a specific person.
Now, this is a bit misleading as well. Yes, there is a provision in this bill right around page 1689 that does say certain individuals can be released early from prisons, and one of the reasons they can be released early is if they are a juvenile, they have a covered health condition like diabetes or asthma, they're 50 years or older, or they're within 12 months of release. However, it doesn't say that they just carte blanche get released like the jailbreak Tucker mentioned. Instead, it says that they would be placed in community supervision, which I'm pretty sure is a pseudonym for probation. Again, not taking sides on that, just saying it's a little different to say get out of jail free versus go home and be on probation.
Here's the censorship part, and it's part of a growing and ominous theme in that direction, a theme that will prevent you from saying or believing what you like. This bill directs $1 million to the National Science Foundation to study coronavirus, quote, misinformation, which shouldn't be allowed.
All right, keep this in mind. He just said, quote, misinformation. This is actually really important because there's a very distinct difference between misinformation and disinformation. And in fact, when we go to page 19 of this law, we'll actually see the quote that he was referring to was $1 million shall be for a study on the spread of COVID-19 related disinformation. This is a very, very critical misquoting by Tucker, and it's right here in black and white, because misinformation means you made a mistake, that it was an accident, that something you said was wrong. That happens. Mistakes happen. This is not for the censorship of mistakes. This $1 million is for the study and research into disinformation. Disinformation is incorrect information that is deliberately spread for a political agenda. So purposefully spreading lies that or information that you know is false, that's disinformation. And that, I think we can all agree, is disingenuous.
Shut up and stop disagreeing with our pronouncements. That's not allowed. Take another hit on your government-sponsored dab pen and submit. That's the message that it sends. But for the favored few, the Democratic Party's donor class, the bill is far more gentle and soothing. In fact, it's a payday. This bill would repeal the cap on state and local tax deductions. That would help, almost exclusively help, high-income neighborhoods in overtaxed blue states. Why is that significant? Because that's the beating heart of the Democratic electorate. This is a payoff to them.
Tucker suggests that the state and local tax deduction limit would be permanently removed for the benefit of Democratic states. But it actually says on page 224 that the elimination of the limit on the deduction for state and local taxes is only for 2020 and 2021. And here are the provisions that show those specific dates. So I hope you don't chastise me for sharing this insight. I'm not trying to bag on Tucker. I'm just trying to use this as a vehicle to provide more information to you. I don't know that Tucker wrote this. Maybe this was a script given to him, but I wanted to share some more insight directly into the bill. If you like the way I share insight, make sure to check out the programs down below where I could teach you the psychology of money and how to invest in real estate below market value. Also, if you need life insurance, there's a link down below so that you could get life insurance within 4 to 5 minutes on your phone. You could Apple Pay for it. You get a quote within about 90 seconds. It's super easy. Most people who try it out love it. And if you deposit $100 with Webull, you could get 2 free stocks once you deposit that $100. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you subscribe, and we'll see you next time.